Ooh, I'm excited about Legacy again. Hello, folks. Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU here, for another BNR update. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you. I have been, shall we say, a little critical of a few of the last BNR updates, especially the one where they only took grief. But I have a lot of good things to say today, and I am very excited about where we are going. So, in case you have not seen the core changes yet, in Modern, Underworld Breach is banned. In Legacy, Sowing Mycospawn and Troll of Khazad-dum. In Pauper, they took some big swings. Basking Broodscale is banned. Kuldotha Rebirth is banned, as well as Deadly Dispute. And we got two unbans there of Prophetic Prism, as well as High Tide. So I have a lot of things to say about Legacy. So that I don't get interrupted later, today's video is sponsored by two wonderful organizations, the first of which is TOAmagic.com. We are in a post-ban world, which is very exciting, and we are not far away from the release of Tarkir Dragonstorm. The metagame, it be a-changing, and if you need any cards for that, please check out TOA, use promo code ThrabenU to save 5% on your order, and you're going to get free shipping. Beyond that, this video is also sponsored by Moxfield.com. I am going to have a ton of post-ban updates to decks going up over the next couple of days. So if you want to see what I'm playing before it hits the channel, if you want to see all of those lists, check them out. So today's video is going to fall into 4 or 5 parts, depending on how I'm feeling at the end. We're going to talk about Troll and all of its implications. We're going to talk about Sowing Mycospawn and all of its implications. We're going to talk about Oops All Spells, and then we are going to talk about Ancient Tomb decks. So that's our structure. Feel free to skip around on the timestamps if you just want to hear about one specific thing. But here we go. I've got 4 pages of handwritten notes. Let's do it, baby. Today is not going to be a visual heavy day. Today is a talking heavy day for sure. But before I get into the meat itself, I just want to say that this was a very, very well written BNR update. Some of these other BNR updates from recent times have felt like the person who wrote them had no idea what was going on in Legacy, and they were just kind of phoning it in and doing what they were told to do. This is not the case here. This is well written. It shows a strong understanding of what's going on and what is potentially going to happen as a result of these bans. And like A+ on the writing here. Shout outs to Carmen. You did a fantastic job with this write-up. And if you haven't checked out the full text, that is something that I encourage you to do. So the breakdown for why Troll was banned basically highlighted the biggest problem of Blue-Black Reanimator through the last couple of BNR updates. And that's that it is too good at being both a fair deck and an unfair deck at the same time with a very, very low opportunity cost. So in our, I guess, now defunct version of Blue-Black Reanimator, you basically splashed 4 Entombs, 4 Reanimates, 2 Fatties into a existing tempo shell, and maybe you played Animate Dead depending on the week and how all in on the combo aspect you were. That fluctuated a little bit over the last couple of months. But sometimes it was just 4 Entomb, 4 Reanimate as finishers. Sometimes you were 2 Animate Dead. Sometimes you were 4 Animate Dead. It varied. But because Troll of Khazad-dum was in the deck, it was a part of your mana base. It was something you could cycle at low cost. It was hard castable in the end game. It had a ton of things going for it. And on the podcast, we said that one of Entomb or Troll needed to go. And that action was taken. And I am very, very happy with that. And the things that are written in this article about Troll very much echo the things that we were saying on the podcast. And that's great. This does not mean the people at WotC listened to us. We saved Legacy. It means that the people who wrote this BNR update and the people who made the decisions this time around actually understood what was going on. And that's great. That is what I love to see. I think banning Troll is not something that is obvious to someone who is a casual Legacy player. I think if you are playing Legacy casually, you might go, hey, maybe this Entomb card or maybe this Reanimate card is out of line. But I think you have to be really dialed in to see, hey, adding Troll into this deck marked the point where there was a fundamental shift in how these decks were being built. So, really, shout outs to them for recognizing that. In thinking about where these decks go next, all of these land cycling things, like Troll, Khazad-dum, and Lorien Revealed, they are a part of your mana base. In addition to all of the normal benefits, they also allow you to skimp on lands. So you might need to see the decks that look something like this go up a land or two, or go up a few cantrips to help them hit those land drops. Now, there are other creature cyclers out there that exist. There are some much older ones like Street Wraith, and then there is the remainder of the Lord of the Rings cycle, such as Generous Ent and Oliphant. But the gap between things like Generous Ent and Troll of Khazad-dum is actually really, really big. The Troll had Hyper Menace, right? It was very, very difficult to block, and it was 6 power. Generous Ent is a 5/7, a big body, but Reach is not anywhere along the lines of that Super Menace ability that the Troll had. And while Oliphant has some okay offensive stat lines, I can tell you from playing this card, it feels very noticeably worse than the Troll, despite the fact that they have similar stat lines. The 4 toughness means that you might push some damage through with your trample, but you are often going to die in combat to regular legacy-sized cards in a way that the Troll is not going to. Also, it may be obvious, it may not be obvious, these are forest and mountain cycling, and then there's an eagle that is much worse than the others as well. That's not necessarily going and fetching the lands that you want to fetch, right? So if you wanted to keep the deck more or less the same, you would now be going into, say, Grixis or Bug to accomplish the same thing. And then Wasteland is going to be worse. Wasteland is going to be better against you if you start going into a 3-color deck. This was a frustration of many players when fighting against the blue-black Reanimator deck, is in addition to being a great tempo deck and a great combo deck and occasionally a great control deck, it also just was pretty resilient because the Troll just finds you your basic swamp. So if your first fetch land is blue, you fetch an island, you swamp cycle into a Troll, congratulations. Wasteland, generally speaking, is dead against you for the remainder of the game, and you accidentally end up dodging a major pillar of Legacy. That is effects like Blood Moon and Back to Basics and Wasteland. So if you are currently a blue-black Reanimator player, the question you're probably asking is like, what do we do now? Can we stay this deck that is simultaneously a tempo deck and a combo deck while the Troll is being banned? Or do we finally have to pick a lane and specialize in something while having a fallback plan? And I want to clarify what I mean there. The current, I'm going to call it current, but you know what I mean, it's banned. The current blue-black Reanimator shell can play entirely different games with not very much work and very few slots being used to commit to things, right? Sometimes you can just play this tempo game and kill your opponent with your Goyfs or your Brazen Borrowers. Occasionally we'll even see, Delvers out of these decks, Murktide Regents, whatever. But as soon as you start slotting in more creatures or show and tells or faithless lootings to support more of a primary combo plan, then all of a sudden you have a bunch of relatively dead cards in the fairer matchups in a way that the deck doesn't really right now. And the Reanimates and Animate Deads, you can use a removal spell or a counter spell on your opponent's stuff and then grab their creatures, right? So even if you don't have your big bad Entomb, you still had uses for those cards. With Troll gone, the Reanimate stuff is a lot less free, and there's a lot more pressure on your Entomb to be good. And the next best Entomb effect is twice as much mana. And that jump from 1 to 2 is really big. So for example, I would not be excited to put a card like Unmarked Grave into my Legacy deck. Have I seen it in play in Legacy before? Yes, absolutely. Sometimes out of a, say, mono black Reanimator deck. But there is a very large difference in terms of interaction between at your end step, I cast Entomb, I reanimate it on my main phase, and I put a thing into my graveyard and pass the turn. Well, now your Urza Saga can tick up, and you can fetch your graveyard hate. Now you can cantrip for your graveyard hate. Now you can play a sorcery speed Bojuka Bog to answer that creature. Now you can untap and activate your Lion Sash without your opponent having a window to reanimate it. It is a very, very big difference in terms of gameplay. So we might see players shifting back to black-red Reanimator if you want to be reanimating these large creatures. Black-red Reanimator historically is faster than blue-black. You have your unmask style effects, you have your faithless looting, you often get dark rituals in those builds, and you often get very good at shoving a creature on turn 1 or turn 2. But it did not have the same degree of fair fallback gameplay that the blue-black deck did. It was so easy to stick a fair threat and then protect it with your dazes, your force of wills, your interaction that already was there in the deck to force through your combo. And while black-red Reanimator can specifically do that versus discard, you can't discard the top of the deck. You can't, play around that thing that your opponent has intentionally left on top of their library to answer your coming creature. I think the deck building has gotten a lot harder for the Reanimator players. I think people are going to try full-on Reanimator. I think people are going to try Show and Tell Reanimator. I think people are going to try Black-Red Reanimator. I think people are still going to try to force this blue-black tempo Reanimator stuff. I think it's going to be significantly harder, and I am hopeful that at this point, this finally shakes out to be a reasonable Legacy deck, instead of something where a month from now we go like, okay, when's the next BNR update? Note at the time of this recording, there is scheduled to be a follow-up video on the bannings tomorrow. That'll be today for you all if you're watching this on Tuesday. So it is possible we might see something about an update for when BNR announcements are going to happen. Many people are unhappy with the current wait 3 months for changes model. And to the best of my knowledge, there were no dates given in the article for when the next update was going to be. That feels intentional to me. So there might be some follow-up news coming today regarding future updates. All right, back to the main thread here. Back to Blue-Black Reanimator. So let's say you are trying to continue to play this blue-black tempo Reanimator stuff. I think the biggest question you are going to need to ask yourself is, how good is a fair Reanimate in current Legacy? There are some really, really good creatures that already exist in this tempo Reanimator shell, right? And if your deck gets worse at finding your Atraxa, your Archon of Cruelty, your Grizzlebrand, whatever it is that you're trying to get in play, how good is it when your Reanimate is hitting a Bowmaster? How good is it when it is hitting a Goyf? How good is it when it is hitting a Delver? Whatever ancillary threats you are playing, or I guess they might become primary threats now, is that going to be good enough? Is it going to be good enough when your Reanimates target your opponent's creatures that your deck is not actually built around? Because I think it is totally reasonable to go, fetch land, Dark Ritual, a Bobble, Goyf, swing in for a couple, play this fair value attrition plan, and have 4 Reanimates, 4 Entombs, 2 Fatties in the deck. That is not crazy to do. I don't know that you get to do something like that while also playing some Animate Deads. I think if you are trying to play the hybrid deck still, I think it becomes a button that you slam sometimes instead of the primary plan, but the deck probably slows down a lot and becomes less consistent, which is obviously very good. That's what we want to see happening. Now, there are going to be some casualties in this troll ban, with the biggest and most immediate one that comes to mind being the mono black aggro deck. At a handful of points over the past year or so, mono black aggro has actually been a viable legacy strategy that has put up decent challenge finishes from time to time and plenty of 5-0s. And relatively speaking, it was a good budget thing to be doing because you don't need dual lands. You just had your Stalactite Stalkers, your Bowmasters, your Goyfs, your Dauthi Voidwalkers, all sorts of creatures that looked like that, backed by Troll and Reanimate as something more unfair that you can be doing. Well, now those fair decks have lost a big part of what made them viable. So these mono black aggro decks, these Rakdos aggro decks, these Rakdos Fable of the Mirror Breaker graveyard value decks that had Reanimate and Troll of Khazad-dum in there as kind of a band-aid to make the deck better. Those sorts of decks are going to feel the troll banning very, very significantly. Probably even more so than the Reanimator deck does. We absolutely had a few trophies here on the channel with some questionable brews that were basically held together by the power of Grief Reanimate, Entomb Reanimate, Troll Reanimate, and those decks keep losing out on more and more of their pieces that are actually in the better decks of the time. This very much feels like when Painter got a nerf when Sensei's Divining Top was banned. So, was this enough? With Grief, we said this was not enough. With Psychic Frog, we said this was not enough. Now, last time around, when Psychic Frog was banned, everyone on my podcast was basically of the opinion you need to take out Frog, and you need to take one other card from the shell, and then we are good. Now, it took an extra 3 months, but we did get to that point. We are finally here. This is what I wanted quite a while ago, but we have it now. I am hopeful that this was enough, and Reanimator is now in check, and a reasonable to good thing to be doing in Legacy. It may be that Entomb is still over the line and Entomb is very good, but I think I will be totally fine with playing against Reanimator in its current shell. And if it is better at being let me rephrase this. If it is worse at playing multiple game plans at the same time, I think I can adjust my decks to fight against their primary game plan while still being able to respect the secondary game plan, instead of them just having 2 different primary game plans that were incredibly good at the same time. I think while Blue-Black Reanimator might make it through this BNR update as something that's playable, I think it is probably knocked out of its best in the format slot. Alright, now let's talk about Sowing Mycospawn. I'm so happy. Let's start there. Playing against Sowing Mycospawn was miserable in a very different way than playing against Troll of Khazad-dum was. Troll of Khazad-dum might be frustrating. Sowing Mycospawn was infuriating, enraging, because it was so hard to have any counterplay against it. It had 2 possible on-cast triggers, one of which often exiled your basic land, the other of which fetched up a wasteland. So Sowing Mycospawn was often a play on turn 3 that could take out your 2 lands. And I really liked that the article referenced Vexing Bauble. Vexing Bauble kind of destroyed the Legacy play experience. A massive part of the Legacy experience is counter spells being able to stop stuff. And when counter spells stopped stopping stuff, The format fell apart, and too many decks were too good at protecting their combo finishes, and it shut off all of the traditional means of interaction. And that was a very bad thing. When you don't have agencies in your game because you physically cannot interact with what your opponent is doing, it feels miserable and you're just goldfishing against each other. It doesn't have that sweet back and forth interaction and that tension that so many people have come to love from Legacy. And Sowing Mycospawn was operating on the same axis of non interaction, if that makes sense. Its on cast triggers can't be countered by most things that exist in the format. And a lot of times, your traditional counter spells, your dazes, your force of wills, cool, you force of will that body, and then there's still those two triggers there afterwards. And Sowing Mycospawn was going after any land extremely quickly. Basic lands traditionally in Legacy are supposed to be safe. Your Blood Moons, your Magus of the Moons, your Price of Progresses, these sorts of cards don't interact with basic lands. And so there's this tension. Do I want to make my deck have more colors so I can play all the best spells? Or do I want to be better versus the things that traditionally punish mana bases? Do I want to just play around Wasteland by playing 5 islands and 4 basic planes, and then I'm just totally safe? I'll cast my 4 mana Supreme Verdict without ever exposing myself to Wasteland. Yeah, you can do that. But in Legacy, Sowing Mycospawn just got to say no to whatever your lands were. And if you put 2 basic lands into your deck, you gotta make that 3rd land drop sometime, right? And then Sowing Mycospawn is there, ready to take it, and everything else that you love. And I also loved that the article not only referenced this whole like Wasteland kicked Sowing Mycospawn hell, but also just showed off the fact that you can do all this Wasteland stuff, or you can just ramp when you need ramp, or you can go and get your Silver Bullet. That can be your Bojuka Bog, that can be your Mazavith, that can be your Gaia's Cradle, that can be your Caracas, and all of these things happened at an extremely low deck building cost. You didn't slot in a whole bunch of weird stuff to play Sowing Mycospawn. Sowing Mycospawn was just incredible so long as you had a little ramp and some colored mana in your mana base. And then, at the cost of a couple of flex land slots, maybe a sideboard slot, you became very, very good at certain matchups. So having a toolbox where that toolbox was borderline uncounterable was quite unhealthy. And the Sowing Mycospawn in some cases could go and pick up a Cavern of Souls. So congrats, your counterspells that weren't good against Sowing Mycospawn in the first place now don't work against the rest of the cards in the deck. Ah! And I do want to specifically highlight some text that I think is very, very important and is very telling for how bad Sowing Mycospawn actually was. Sowing Mycospawn was putting the Magic play experience at risk. Oh, buddy, that is perfect. That absolutely encapsulates all of my thoughts about Sowing Mycospawn so well. Again, they knocked it out of the park with this article. So again, shout out to Carmen. She did such great work on this portion of the article, and the entire thing as a whole. I think had 4 contributing authors. It's great. So you're an Eldrazi player. Now what? Good news. You still have broken things going on in your deck. Modern Horizons 3, hell of a fucking set, shall we say. You still have Glaring Fleshraker with Kozilek's Command. That is still incredibly powerful. That is something that is broken. You get to that big mana, you have an incredible way to burn people out. You are still capable of churning together some pretty impressive, like, turn 2 to turn 4 sequences. But now you don't get to just obliterate all of your opponent's lands all the time and just invalidate everything that they're doing. Now you have to play a little bit fairer. I think Eldrazi falls in line pretty quickly as something that is reasonable to play in Legacy, but that is not one of the better things to be doing in Legacy. And I think there might be decks that are better suited to using Glaring Fleshraker and Kozilek's Command than a traditional Eldrazi deck. And I think, a one ring combo deck might be better suited to using those cards than a traditional Eldrazi aggro deck with your Thought-Knot Seers, your Reality Smashers, and cards that look like that. But let's hold off on the One Ring until a little bit later. It's going to get its own section. Let's talk about the metagame more generally for a second. Consigned to Memory is absolutely everywhere. I think these are like $18 on Magic Online or something like that. That's how popular and prevalent this card is. It's an uncommon. This card is very strong. In the Sowing Mycospawn world, this was one of the few things that could actually interact with the Sowing Mycospawn trigger. At 3 mana, you could use this to counter Sowing Mycospawn and then replicate it twice. To get both of the Sowing Mycospawn triggers at the same time. And this was one of the very few ways that existed to cleanly 1-for-1 with Sowing Mycospawn. Assuming you had 3 mana and an open blue and 2 other open mana when they cast their Sowing Mycospawn. See some of the problems? It's rough. This is still a card that I expect to see in Legacy. This still does powerful things. This still counters the One Ring. This still counters very important triggers. Your Storm triggers, your Thassa's Oracle triggers. This still is a card that will do some work. But this is maybe a card that doesn't have to be played as a 3 or 4 of in every single blue deck that you ever play. So, respect this card still. This card is still very good. There is some splash damage to the Sowing Mycospawn ban, because it's not just Eldrazi that plays this. There are a handful of Cloud Post ramp style decks that are playing Sowing Mycospawn as well. And they use it as a way to assemble their Cloud Posts and also obliterate your lands. Very, very flexible card in those shells. I think those decks are still fine. Planar Nexus plus a Tron land can still assemble 3 or 4 mana on turn 2, meaning that you can play the One Ring or Karn or whatever else you want to be doing on turn 2. Like, you can still have some very, very fast, very powerful starts with those decks. You just don't get Sowing Mycospawn to ramp you, or blow up your opponent's lands, or find the silver bullet all at the same time in one card slot. You are going to have to make some decisions about what you want the slots in your deck to be doing, instead of just having Sowing Mycospawn as this incredibly powerful catch-all. The biggest thing that the Sowing Mycospawn bans is effectively unban multicolor decks in Legacy. And very specifically there, I mean multicolor control decks. Control was very close to dead in Legacy. There were just no decks that were looking to grind out the endgame because there were too many things threatening them in the early game. And it is very hard to respect Entomb plus Reanimate at the same time as, hey, you might not have any lands on turn 2 or turn 3. And there is going to be so much pressure being taken off of Control that I hope this is enough to get it to return to the format, at least in some numbers. There are great Legacy control engines. You've got your Uros, you've got your Up the Beanstalks, you have Lorien Revealed as a thing that can be a land in the early game and a draw 3 late game, and I hope we start seeing some of that stuff again. Okay. All right, one more thing about Eldrazi before we move on. So if you are an Eldrazi player and you want to continue to play this deck, I think you should be trying to drive the deck in the aggro direction rather than this more controlling, slower Sowing Mycospawn direction. And my mind goes back to some of the earlier Eldrazi leagues that I recorded where Eldrazi Linebreaker just absolutely wrecked people. Blaring Fleshbreaker is still a very silly Magic the Gathering card, right? And if you are casting fair colorless spells and accruing a handful of tokens, and then those tokens are converted directly into damage that tramples and speeds up your other Eldrazi, I think this could be a very attractive way to think about building the deck. All right, now let's talk about the Boogeyman. Let's talk about Oops All Spells now. So in my own podcast, the Eternal Glory podcast, we had identified 3 things that needed to happen to get Legacy to a good place. And 2 of those 3 things happened. Sowing Mycospawn was banned. One of Entomb or Troll of Khazad-dum was banned. And the third thing was take something out of Oops All Spells. Those were the three things that we identified as the problem spots of current Legacy. And as tournament grinder Meatloaf once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So we'll take this. But Oops lives to see another day in its current form. According to the data alluded to in the article, the win rate of Oops All Spells was appropriate for the format, but was high enough to be like on the watch list. Like we're keeping an eye on this actively, and I very much appreciate that heads up because this is a deck that I am personally quite worried about. And as Legacy players, I think one of the most immediate critical questions is, with pressure being taken off of sideboards, can we keep Oops All Spells in check? Or is it going to continue to feel sort of oppressive when you are playing against it because it is incredibly difficult to interact with? Now, basically every deck that I build right now in Legacy starts with 4 Leyline of the Void in the sideboard. I just kind of feel like that is obligatory right now. It is the best graveyard hate versus Oops because it is the one that just completely shuts off the graveyard on turn 0 because the traditional stuff like Fairy Macabre and Surgical Interaction is just not beating the current builds with Memory's Journey and Jack-O-Lantern and Poxwalkers, giving the deck more resiliency than it has had previously. The thing is that Leyline of the Void is often not good enough to win the game. Your Oops All Spells player is going to know that these sorts of cards are coming in, and they have planned for it. And they are going to have one or multiple different jukes for the post-sideboard games, or just the ability to answer Leylines well if they know that specifically is the card that is coming. So I have seen Goyfs, I have seen Rotting Regisaurs, Goblin Charbelchers, I've seen all sorts of crazy stuff. And you don't know what's coming. You don't know what is in your opponent's flex slots within their sideboard. Even if you literally see their entire deck in game 1, what they are going to do with all of that fast mana, it's unknown. And here's the other thing. It's not like Graveyard Hate just beats the main deck either. There are more creatures than ever accidentally in the deck. You can just be beaten to death by Boggart Trawler and Narcomoebas and Poxwalkers and cards of that general nature, even if you do stick your incredibly powerful, narrow sideboard card versus them. This is currently my biggest active area of concern within Legacy, because I think it is difficult to get better at fighting Oops All Spells than what the average deck is already doing. I think if you want to make money playing Legacy, if you want to be grinding leagues, like playing through leagues as quickly as possible, winning as many games as possible, this is the deck that you register. I think this is low-hanging fruit for a very, very strong deck to try out while people are figuring out the format. It usually takes a couple of weeks for control decks to be good in a format, right? Because you need to build a control deck to beat the established metagame. Well, when you don't have the established metagame yet, it's very hard to build the control deck for it. So while everyone is farting around, trying to make their up the beanstalks work, trying to figure out, like, how am I going to put this Lorien Revealed back on top of my library with Mystic Sanctuary? What does the rest of the deck look like? Well, people are trying to brew their control decks and kind of get the handle on what the game should be. Just get them dead. Just play Oops All Spells. Just win on turn 1. Win on turn 2 after interacting with your opponent. Get them dead. Enjoy your play points. Enjoy your treasure chests. If there is anything that is currently out of line in Legacy after this BNR update, it is Oops All Spells. I have not talked about Nadu in this video. Nadu does not get its own section in this video. Despite the fact that I hate the play patterns of Nadu, I don't think it is currently an area of concern. And I think it is possible that over the next couple of weeks, months, we might end up seeing a meta that has warped around trying to beat Oops All Spells, which does not sound great to me. But again, my overall tone for the day, incredibly positive. So this is the I am optimistic, but I'm also aware that this might be a problem. And I'm going to end this section by using some of the language from the article in a slightly different way. Oops All Spells has caused environmental pressures on the format, compressing games to the first handful of turns and putting the Magic play experience at risk. See what I mean? I think we are going to have to be very, very careful in the coming weeks to accurately evaluate how good Oops All Spells is and how problematic it is for the format. Again, this is on the shit list. This is on the we're actively watching this list. So hopefully, if it becomes immediately obvious that this is out of line, we are not waiting until, June or July to get rid of this. All right, the final thing that I want to talk about today is the One Ring, which was not mentioned in our Legacy article, but I'm extrapolating a little bit. So I'm going to read the very tail end of this. Quote, Blood Moon Stompy and Oops All Spells are prime examples of decks that have seen their meta share rise in the past few months with the density of modal, double-faced land cards in Modern Horizons 3, both currently within bounds of play rates and win rates that have been historically acceptable. Ideally, the above changes will create more counterplay against these decks over time. So I think if there is something in the Moon Stompy shell that is out of line at all, it is the One Ring, and that has to do with play patterns that I'll get into in a second. So why is Moon Stompy on the rise? The answer is that it is a natural predator to Eldrazi. If you just get to shut off all of their cool lands, all their lands that produce colorless, it is much harder for them to actually play the game. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. And if you also have tools like Fury and Broadside and Pyrogoyf that can take out the bodies that survive or the bodies that make it through, you are going to have an incredibly good matchup there. So, is Red Prison, Moon Stompy, whatever you want to call it, a generically powerful deck, or was it situationally good within the metagame? We will probably find an answer to that very, very quickly. The thing about these decks that power out stuff via Ancient Tomb is that they tend to run out of gas very quickly. All of the cards that they play are must-answer cards that will win the game on their own, or at the very least, push the game very strongly in the direction of you winning. Let's look at one of the fairest things they do, Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. So how many cards are you using to answer this one card? Probably one removal spell to get rid of the 2/2 red Goblin Shaman token, and then probably another removal spell later to get rid of the flip side of it. Beyond just those two things, you are also probably getting some treasures out of it. You are potentially looting away some bad cards while also growing your Pyrogoyfs for a little bit later by introducing new card types to the graveyard. This is an exceptional value-oriented card. That's not a card that I think is out of line in any capacity. That's just a really good Magic the Gathering card. But the thing about a lot of the other cards that you play, the Blood Moons, the Trinispheres, the Chalice of the Voids, the Magus of the Moons, the Initiative cards, is once you stop 2 or 3 cards, the deck traditionally has run out of gas and not top-decked particularly well. The One Ring is a first thing that you could power out, and if you stick it early, sometimes even on turn 1, you will run away with the game, as you just have so many resources at your disposal. But there's this sort of insidious play pattern where your opponent thinks everything is going well. I countered the Blood Moon, I fetched my basics, I stopped that Trinisphere that's coming, oh god, the One Ring came down, how do I ever win now? There is some counterplay there, there's some sequencing there that matters a lot, there's trying to find the right time to play the One Ring, weighing the, do I jam it now? Do I have to wait till you tap out of blue mana because I'm playing around Consign to Memory? Like, there are some neat sub-games that are going on there, But if you are a blue mage, you might be used to being able to just crush this deck if you make it past about turn 4, and that's just not the case anymore. And broadside, throwing the One Ring in particular, is an incredible amount of burst damage that can make you go from, hey, I'm doing safe, to, oh, I am dead, instantly. So while if there's one thing that's out of line in Legacy, it is Oops All Spells. And if there's another thing that we should keep an eye on, perhaps it is the One Ring beyond that. I think it's a big gap, though. Like, Oops All Spells is like up here on my shit list of like, I need to keep my eye on you. If you're going to be home later than 9, you've got to call me. Whereas the One Ring is like, maybe they're a little bit of a troubled youth, but maybe they're okay. I think that is kind of the difference in terms of scale and threat level here. But the One Ring is definitely something that we should keep an eye on moving forward. Because the One Ring makes it so that the control decks don't get to just win the fight over the first wave of spells and then just take over the game. The One Ring makes it so that waves 3, waves 4, waves 5 just keep coming and coming and coming. And if you are dedicating all of your resources to just stopping your opponent's cards, you are probably not sticking your own threat to pressure their life totals back. Now, in good news, Moon Stompy decks in particular tend to have very, very polarizing matchups. So if you want to play something to beat them, you can probably beat them. Delver is a classic example. I am leading on Ancient Tomb. You are leading on Delver of Secrets. If I am effectively taking 5 damage per turn cycle, 2 from my Ancient Tomb, 3 from your Delver, assuming nothing else happens, I die in, 4 or 5 turns very, very easily. And then you maybe don't have life for those MDFCs that are bolting you, for that One Ring that is dealing you 1 damage, then 2 damage, then 3 damage, and so forth. If we start seeing less true Reanimator and we start to see more tempo decks that can pressure this deck in the early game and then bring in things that are scary in the post-sideboard games, your Delver deck that just has a bunch of Hydroblasts to generically stop most of your cards other than the One Ring, and probably stick a creature, deal with 2 or 3 things, and then get over the finish line before you stabilize. So my guess is that the Moon Stompy decks are going to feel quite good and be quite powerful, but I think they can be checked by natural metagame forces. This is going to be one of the first things that I personally try out in the post-banning world. Like, I want to put my money where my mouth is and try to play the thing that potentially might be broken to see if it actually is broken or not. All right, so here's my closing thought for you. We are not very far away from the release of Tarkir Dragonstorm, which looks to be a good, powerful set. It's not a Modern Horizons 3 or a Lord of the Rings set that is going to completely upend the format, but there's going to be some really cool players in that set that are capable of doing some powerful things. And as an Ancient Tomb gamer, I've got my eye on a couple of cards from the set that I think are going to be pretty good. So I'm very happy to see that when those cards come out, I'm going to get to experience the joy of playing with those cards without just losing all of my lands to Sowing Mycospawn, and without constantly just dying to the currently very strong blue-black Reanimator. So if you made it this far, throw me a like, throw me a comment, let me know your thoughts down below. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. If you are a YouTube member, you are going to start getting gameplay videos pretty much immediately. For everyone else, new post-ban gameplay will start coming out on Friday. Have a great rest of the day. See ya!